Hello, everyone. Now, I know that it's hard to keep up on top of what's going on in the Holy Land, but if you want to know more about what's happening here in Israel, I'm Aaron Porras, and this is the Weekly Review. To start, a pretty big announcement today, seeing as it's coming from Defense Minister and alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz. The Blue and White Party leader saying that while Jerusalem will remain undivided, there is room for a Palestinian capital in it. And this, as Gantz is likely setting himself politically apart from Prime Minister Netanyahu ahead of an election campaign that he'll probably have to renew very soon. Well, already criticisms are coming in hot. Former Jerusalem mayor and current Likud MK Nir Barkat saying that Jerusalem is the eternal capital of only one nation and that it's that of the Jewish state of Israel. Then Higher Education Minister and Likud MK Zev Elkin likewise tweeting that Benny is confused. There is no room in the United Jerusalem for a Palestinian capital and never will be. And meanwhile, Jerusalem and Heritage Minister Rafi Peretz is claiming that even Gantz himself feels the same about Jerusalem, given what he knows from their personal discussions. But Gantz is holding firm behind the seemingly contradictory statement, saying that he wants the Palestinians to be a part of the peace process and that he hopes such a move might help settle the long ongoing conflict. This while pointing out that, in fact, this is also consistent with President Trump's Middle East peace plan. In other news, Prime Minister Netanyahu is expressing cautious but confident optimism as he addressed the nation from his mandated isolation.
שלום לכם, אני מדבר מהבידוד, ביום שישי אני אצא ממנו, במוצאי שבת אני אלך להתחסן. ביקשתי להיות המחוסן הראשון כדי לשמש דוגמה ולשכנע אתכם שאפשר להתחסן וצריך להתחסן. עד סוף ינואר יהיו לנו כאן מיליונים רבים של חיסונים. אני עמלתי קשה מאוד כדי להביא אותם, ואני מבקש מכם תשתמשו בהם.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu again promising to lead the charge in taking the recently approved Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for coronavirus. And the vow in repeated efforts to galvanize support amongst the general public, which by and large is still skeptical of getting the shot over fears of a rushed development. Still, with generally widespread support from the scientific community and a quickly rising infection rate, vaccines are seemingly remaining as the best option. Netanyahu now also revealing the order of preference for vaccinations set to begin in certain groups by as soon as next week, though exact dates still have yet to be determined.
הסגל הרפואי ומד"א יקבלו ראשונים, אחר כך קשישים והמטפלים שלהם בדיור המוגן, אחר כך האוכלוסייה מעל גיל 60, ואחר כך בעלי מחלות רקע מסוכנות בזמן הקורונה, ואחריהם שאר האוכלוסייה. הם גם קבעו מי לא יחוסן, לא ילדים, לא נשים בהיריון, לא בעלי אלרגיות חריפות, וכמובן לא אלה שכבר החלימו מהקורונה. זה בסך הכל משאיר כ6 מיליון איש, יש לנו די ויותר לכולם. אם כולם יתחסנו, יהיה לנו עודפים רבים.
As for the IDF, Israel's army plans to begin allegedly mandatory vaccinations for soldiers by the end of December. Meanwhile, in spite of overnight infection rates remaining at nearly 3,000 for the second day in a row, active cases now at upwards of 21,800 and the death toll at 3,040, Israel's coronavirus cabinet is breaking earlier promises to resume restrictions. Rather, public libraries may actually now accept visitors, in addition to museums, malls, and marketplaces that are already open. Netanyahu, meanwhile, urging the public to exercise their own self-restraint.
אני מבקש שכל אחד יסתכל על עצמו, ויגיד מה אני עושה כדי לשמור על הכללים. הנה אני יושב פה בבית, ראש הממשלה, בבידוד, אני שומר על כל הכללים, זה מה שאתם צריכים לעשות. תשמרו על עצמכם, תשמרו על אחרים, אנחנו יוצאים מהקורונה, אבל אפשר לצאת ממנה בלי שום מחיר נוסף רציני, לא כלכלי, לא בחיי אדם, לא בבריאות. אנא עשו זאת, ולכו להתחסן. שיהיה לכם חג שמח.
In other news, a coronavirus inoculation may be available for the masses soon, but the masses don't seem interested. Poll after poll continuing to show that up to 75% of Israelis plan to refuse vaccination entirely, believing that the rush to approve the vaccines comes at the expense of proper safety research, particularly into the potential long-term effects of the vaccine's revolutionary method of operation. To try and tip the scales, though, Health Minister Yuli Edelstein is already outlining the basic tenets of the government's vaccine incentives program. Under the new plan, vaccinated individuals would receive a so-called green passport that would afford a number of benefits and advantages, such as not needing to quarantine when returning from abroad, as well as permitting entry into cultural events, restaurants, and more. In other news, a new study on the long-lasting effects of coronavirus is now hinting at a very different culprit than you might expect: yourself. And the study, written by immunobiologists at Yale University, has yet to be published or peer-reviewed, but According to the results so far, all of the reports of continuing illness like fatigue and breathlessness that linger long after coronavirus infection, that may actually be caused by our own immune system and not the virus itself. The study's authors are explaining that in their observations, at least so far, COVID-19 patients often had a dramatic increase in autoantibodies, which made initial COVID infection symptoms more severe while continuing long after infection to attack healthy proteins in the body instead of those of the coronavirus disease. Well, if true, this could mean that simple immunosuppressive treatments might actually be effective in fighting the post-COVID syndromes. Now, while health officials continue wrapping their heads around just what exactly is going on with this pandemic, hospitals are still working to stand strong under the ever-increasing caseloads. With less than 500 treatment spaces and a crowded 250 square meter ICU, the Laniado Hospital in central Israel's Netanya still manages to serve over 500,000 people from the nearby communities. But with the growing weight of such heavy responsibility, hospital officials are warning that their current model is simply unsustainable. But given the hospital's mission, staff are far from throwing in the towel. You see, originally created in 1976 as a maternity clinic, the Laniado Hospital is the physical embodiment of a vow between the late Sanz Hasidic rabbi Yekutiel Halberstam and God. Because after losing his wife and 11 children to the Holocaust, Halberstam, aka the Klausenberg rabbi, promised that should he himself survive, he'd open a hospital and save as many lives as humanly possible. Well, that's exactly what he did, and since then, the hospital has also extended its services to internal medicine, pediatrics, oncology, hematology, intensive care, and more. All Laniado needs now, especially in the face of the coronavirus pandemic, is to expand and support its struggling ICU. But they can't do it alone. With a projected price tag of 8 million shekels, the public nonprofit hospital is looking to quadruple its intensive care capacity from 6 beds to 24, while also adding living spaces for family visitations and meetings with doctors. So far, though, with the help of crowdfunding platforms, they've raised just 500,000 shekels, or 1/16 of the total cost. So what can we do? Well, the crowdfunding deadline is yet to expire. Laniado asking anyone and everyone who can to support their mission quick. Now, with a reshuffling of the daily Knesset docket and a late afternoon filibuster, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party successfully delayed the dissolving of the Knesset and a return to elections for now. Likud lawmakers arguing that they're trying for last-minute negotiations with alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party, which is backing the bill to dissolve. A last-ditch effort to stop the fourth Israeli elections in 2 years. Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud now meeting with partners Blue and White. But most agree that these negotiations are a smokescreen still likely to fail, as Netanyahu is reportedly demanding Gantz give up on his turn as premier, as promised in their unity agreement. So while the bill still needs to pass 3 Knesset readings for the government to dissolve, party leaders old and new are gearing up for a campaign. Starting with Gideon Sa'ar, the longtime Netanyahu rival recently resigned from the premier's Likud party to start the New Hope faction, which several other high-profile MKs, including fellow Likud member Yifat Shasha Biton, have now already expressed intentions to join. And this giving Sa'ar's new party a new boost in the polls, now projected to be the second largest party with 21 seats, behind the Likud with 27, and with the opposition Yesh Atid Telem party trailing in third with 14. Meanwhile, opposition party leader Avigdor Lieberman of Israel Beitenu is looking for new partners of his own, calling on Yesh Atid, Yamina, and New Hope leaders to unite against Netanyahu and the ultra-Orthodox bloc. He's even already outlined the would-be Unity Party's platform, including pushing for term limits for the Prime Minister's office and barring an indicted MK from being nominated to form a government or be elected president. He also calls for holding municipal and Knesset elections simultaneously to save on costs, installing a constitution in place of the basic laws, requiring all parties to appoint at least 3 women among their top 10 spots, and then a number of measures that challenge the balance between religion and state, like allowing civil marriages, introducing secular studies into Haredi school curriculum, allowing municipal rabbis to oversee Jewish conversions, funding public transport on the Sabbath, and finally expanding mandatory military or non-military national service to all Israeli citizens.
The light of peace on this Hanukkah day has never shone brighter than today in the Middle East. Those were the words of the Israeli Prime Minister on Thursday after it was announced that Morocco would be the 4th Arab country to join the Abraham Accords, and on the first night of the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. Nittany Manson with the details.
Another historic deal makes Morocco the fourth country to join the Abraham Accords and agree to full normalization with Israel after the UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan.
I've always believed that this historic day would come. I've always worked for it. I want to first thank President Trump for his extraordinary efforts to expand peace, to bring peace to Israel and the peoples of the Middle East.
While Israelis are permitted to enter the country, the new deal is expected to also include the opening of diplomatic offices and direct flights. Brokered by President Trump, in exchange, the U.S. agreed to recognize Morocco's sovereignty over the Western Sahara.
President Trump, the people of Israel and the state of Israel will be forever indebted to you for your magnificent efforts on our behalf. I want to thank, too, the King of Morocco, King Mohammed VI, for taking this historic decision to bring a historic peace between us.
Israelis welcomed the normalization of diplomatic ties, saying they hoped it would lead to calm at home.
So the new diplomatic relation with Morocco is something that is really good for both of the countries. I hope it's just going to be the beginning of more diplomatic achievements between Israel and other Middle Eastern countries, and also North African, of course. And hopefully the Palestinians will also be the next one.
While most of Morocco's Jewish population emigrated to Israel after the Independence War of 1948, there remains a small Jewish community who are welcoming the deal with open hearts.
ما يمكنلكش تصور الفرحة اللي أنا حسيت بها كالمغاربة كلهم، واللي بغيت نقول وهو في إسرائيل كاين 1 مليون ديال اليهود مغاربة اللي هما هاجروا لتما، وواحد لابارتي منهم دائما كانت كتمشي وتجي. هاد لا نورماليزاسيون غادي تسهل الامور وغادي تشجع كاع اليهود اللي كاينين تما، وغادي ان شاء الله يجيبوا ولادهم وولاد ولادهم، وغادي تشجع كاع اليهود ديال العالم اللي غادي يجيو، حيت التاريخ ديال المغرب والتاريخ بين اليهود والمسلمين هو معروف في العالم. زعما ما كاينش يهودي في العالم اللي ما كيعرفش زعما ليستوار كي a toujours lié les juifs et les musulmans au Maroc.
Meanwhile, the country's most prominent Islamist group has denounced the move, saying, quote, "All attempts at normalization and the Zionist infiltration are deplorable." The Palestinian Authority has remained silent thus far, even after the King of Morocco called President Mahmoud Abbas to stress his commitment to the Palestinian cause despite the agreement. Nittany Manson, ILTV.
Believe it or not, there was an upside to 2020. This year has seen the fewest Israelis die as a result of a security-related incident like terrorism or combat. According to the Israel Defense Forces figures, 2 Israelis, 1 civilian, and 1 soldier have been killed this year. Back in 2019, a year which had previously seen the lowest number of security-related deaths, Israel had 9 deaths. 2 soldiers and 7 civilians, and 16 people were killed the year before that. IDF Chief of Staff Aviv Kochavi spoke about the statistics during an end-of-the-year briefing, saying, "We, the IDF, thwarted every attempt to infiltrate into Israel and a drop in the number of rockets fired from Gaza."
Now, from defending against viruses to defending against attacks, Israeli research and development again making headlines, this time as the country's famous missile defense systems get another upgrade. Chana Rifkin reporting.
The IDF is announcing this week the latest successful testing of its 3-tiered air shield, an Israeli Defense Ministry video showing the newly upgraded system in action, taking out multiple simulated targets. The Aero Ballistic Missile Interceptor working in high altitudes, the David Sling Middle Altitude Interceptor, and the Iron Dome batteries which shoot down short-range rockets and mortar shells. Meanwhile, with the threat of Iran lately growing, Israel's already looking into sharing its new toys, too. Senior IDF officials reportedly saying that Israel is open to future cooperations on missile defense with our new allies and friends in the Arab Gulf.
In other news, bringing in the new peace in the Middle East, delegates from Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates are here in Israel this week, and they're taking part in the annual holiday celebrations. Arriving in Jerusalem at the Western Wall on Monday, the delegations participated in a candle-lighting ceremony with Chief Rabbi of the Western Wall, Shmuel Rabinovich, calling their visit a magnificent Hanukkah miracle. But of course, that's not all. Earlier on Sunday, Israeli President Reuven Rivlin welcomed the visitors as well at his mansion in Jerusalem And speaking for all Israelis, he blessed both the group as well as the future their visit represents.
Such a pleasure. When we are talking about peace, it's people to people.
It's a new era, and we're so happy for it.
And let's look forward that you will be the bridge to bring a lot of understanding between all the people in the region. It is a real pleasure. God bless all of you and welcome, welcome.
Moving on, Israeli technology is back in the limelight today as Netafim's famous drip irrigation becomes the latest saving grace in fighting food scarcity as well as harmful climate change. Hannah Rifkin with the story.
Rice. It's a dietary staple for upwards of half the global population. But rice paddies are also surprisingly responsible for 1/10 of the world's annually produced methane in the atmosphere, while drinking up 30 to 40% of all annually used fresh water. And that's where Israeli company Netafim comes in.
The rice cultivation in the world is responsible for 10% of the gas of methane emissions to the world. It's equivalent to all what the aviation industry sends methane to the world every year. And with our solution, it goes to zero.
The solution? None other than drip irrigation. Originally developed decades ago to help transform Israel's arid landscape into acres upon acres of farmable produce, Netafim's incredible drip irrigation technology is now being reworked worldwide for rice and a host of other crops. And the results are amazing.
We have finished the beta stage. That means we have 1,000 hectares commercially grown in many countries all over the world. Italy, India, Turkey, with great results and farmers that achieving the goals of saving 70% water, zero methane emission, and great yields.
Moving the rice from paddy cultivation to drip irrigation cultivation allows the farmers to rotate the crops and do more than just rice, and with that they improve their livelihood and they also enable to grow more food with less resources.
All right, an ancient cistern unearthed in 1934 and then lost again, recently rediscovered by the Israel Antiquities Authority. Incredible artifacts included. And Hannah Rifkin reports.
A treasure trove of stone molds, pottery including dozens of oil lamps and more, now unearthed by Israel Antiquities Authorities at a dig site near Beit Shemesh, just west of the capital city of Jerusalem. And just in time for the Hanukkah holiday too. The 1,700-year-old artifacts, apparently from an ancient oil lamp workshop, were discovered amidst work for the development of a new residential neighborhood.
איך אנחנו יודעים שאנחנו בבית יוצר? בגלל התבניות אבן האלה. תבניות אבן זה משהו שהיוצר, הקדר, משתמש בהן כדי להכין בעצם נרות בכמויות. לוקח את תבנית האבן, מדביק עליה את הגוש חמר, מדביק שתי תבניות עליונה ותחתונה אחת לשנייה, וככה נוצר לנו בעצם הנר, וככה יש לנו בעצם ייצור המוני של נרות, שהדוגמה המאותרת עליהם נראית בדיוק אותו דבר. עוד אחד ועוד אחד, עשרות ומאות נרות שמופצים בכל רחבי האזור, בכל רחבי ארץ ישראל למעשה. הממצאים שלנו בעצם כוללים גם את הנרות חרס. אנחנו רואים כאן פרצוף צלמית של סוס. אנחנו מכירים צלמיות בדמויות אנושיות, נשים, גברים, בעלי חיים. יש לנו מסכות, שזה גם מאפיין את משפחת בית נתיב. באמת איזשהו עולם איקונוגרפי מאוד מאוד מיוחד ומעניין.
Beyond holding links to the lives of ancient Israelites, though, the discovery actually also solves another nearly century-long mystery.
הסיפור שלנו מתחיל בשנות ה-30 של המאה ה-20. מפקח אגף העתיקות, דימיטרי ברמקי, מתחיל לקבל ידיעות על טיפוס נרות חדש שמסתובב בשוק העתיקות בירושלים. אחרי מחקר שהוא עושה, הוא מגלה שמקור הנרות מבית נטיף. ואותו ברמקי מגיע לכאן, עושה את החפירה הארכיאולוגית, מוצא הרבה מאוד טיפוסים של נרות, של צלמיות, את התבניות אבן ששימשו להכנת הנרות האלה, והמיקום המדויק של הבורות נעלם. יום אחד אנחנו חופרים פה, ופתאום נפער לנו הפתח הזה. ונכנסתי. והתחלתי להתרגש. גיליתי תיבת מתכת חלודה. מצאנו פה גם את הסלים שבהם הוא חפר את האדמה. בעצם ידענו שבינגו, ידענו שמצאנו את בור המים של ברמקי.
Finally, regarding the area itself, antiquities experts tell us that the artifacts tell the story of the Judean hills in the period following the Bar Kokhba revolt, where much of the Jewish population in the area was diminished and mixed with or replaced by pagan settlers.
And the United States Embassy also invited another special guest for the third candle, which took place on Saturday night, the UAE's ambassador to Washington. Take a look.
This year, I'm lighting the Hanukkah candles with you at the same time the Jewish community in the UAE are lighting their Hanukkah candles. Now that is peace. Next year, let us hope we can celebrate this holiday together in person.
This year's Hanukkah is especially different for the Jews of Dubai, as it comes just months after the normalization deal between the UAE and Israel.
Right now, live on the whole world is talking about Morocco and Israel, but no one forgets that the UAE was the leader. UAE started this whole peace process, and everything started here in this great place.
On a somewhat related note, it's been just a few days since the announcement of the latest normalization between Israel and a majority Arab or Muslim state, this time with the incredible North African nation of Morocco. And now the first fruits of the deal are being announced as well. Israeli Airlines prepping for new direct routes to Casablanca and perhaps even Marrakesh. Of course, unlike with some of the other recently signed peace partners, hundreds of thousands of Israelis have already been traveling to Morocco every year, with hundreds of thousands of Israeli Jews tracing their roots to Morocco's Jewish community. The only differences now, thankfully, will be the new visa guidelines expected to be eased, the ticket price now dropping to roughly $450, and the time spent in the air. Direct flights expected to reduce traveling time to just 5 hours as opposed to between 11 and 14. Finally, if you're interested in being the first to go, Israel's main airliners Archaeological, El Al, and Israel are hoping to get the flight plans off the ground by Passover in late March of 2021. And that's it for ILTV's Weekly Review. I'm Aaron Porras. See you next week.